Good morning. It is 6:35 a.m. on Monday, October 3rd, 2016. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So, back from my trip. It was a little bit whirlwind, but worked out just fine. Today, I am going to be talking, as promised yesterday, about Avatar: The Last Airbender, Season 1, Episode 6, Imprisoned. We've had kind of a series of, I don't want to call them filler episodes exactly, but certainly not primary arc episodes where we're kind of fleshing out is different, fleshing out some of the world building, getting a few side stories to give us a better sense of what's the state of the world right now. Um, Learning about the various places and what's the current status quo related to this war. And uh, so in this episode, we encounter an Earth Kingdom village where all of the Earthbenders have been imprisoned, title, by the Fire Nation Navy, um, basically so that the town won't be able to defend itself, is the short version. The Earthbenders are all taken to this floating rig where they can't fight back, essentially, because as we get a little bit of the bending rules for earthbending, is that metal being refined is lost some of the quality that allow earthbenders to be able to bend it. Um, and although there are developments related to that later in the series and in the follow up series, for now it's a pretty hard and fast rule. Um, Earthbenders cannot bend metal. So on this floating rig, they're kind of stuck. And it's a tough tough position to be in. It breaks spirits. So when the kids are, we've got Aang, Sokka, and Katara are traveling, and one of the things that I really respect about this show, even early in this first season, is the slightly more realistic than typical for a cartoon depiction of their traveling, in the sense that they have a finite amount of supplies and they use up all their food and then they don't have any, and so they're having to forage for nuts in the forest. They find round nuts and oval nuts and rock-shaped nuts that might just be rocks, as Sokka depicts. And once again we see that Sokka, despite not having any bending abilities, still steps up and takes a lot of responsibility for trying to provide for the little team. And in any case, though, they encounter Haru, who is earthbending in secret, and they have no idea that that's supposed to be a secret until we learn later that the dynamic of this town. So the short version, though, is that we see a lot of good world building details and some complexity to it and nuance that once again is are signs that this show has something higher on its mind than just a adventure of the week episode. Well, and in general, so we see, for example, the corruption of the Fire Nation soldiers shaking down Haru's mom for more taxes. Because even though she's paid her taxes, he just says, "Oh, taxes are doubled." And then when she hands over like the few meager coins that they have, I love the detail of him taking a few of the coins and saying, "You can keep the copper ones," and just dropping them on the floor. Just how sort of lazy and contemptuous that is. Like, I'm going to shake you down for extra money, but you know what? You can keep the pennies. and not even like, ugh, ugh. It's just so gross. You just it's the Fire Nation have been depicted so far as pretty unambiguously all bad guys, with the exception of something going on with Iroh. And certainly we see Zuko having a sense of honor, even if he's the antagonist, which contrasts against some of his fellows in the Fire Nation. Uh, but once we have Haru get taken, and again, in a nice bit of nuance, it is the Earth Kingdom, a member of the village, that turns him in after having his life saved. So Haru saves his life from a mine collapse using earthbending, and then that guy turns around and turns him in, which again is, it just shows that it's not black and white here. Um, and whether this guy is just an awful guy or if he's just scared enough, the point is that he's turned in by one of his own, and it's not just a matter of being spotted by a soldier. But we also deal with naivete on the part of Katara. She is idealistic enough to want to rescue Haru, especially just because, she feels like, well, he only earthbended because we urged him to, and now he's been imprisoned. It's kind of our fault. I want to save him. But it's, of course, even as they have that plan, she's still thinking, oh, we're going to save him. But then when she gets there and there's dozens of imprisoned people there, how do you save the one kid and leave everybody else there, especially since one of the others there is Haru's father? Now you've put yourself in this situation where you feel responsible to do something, to change something which may not be within your power to change. And so she does her best to rally everybody with this speech that sounds pretty, but ultimately doesn't have any real power to it. And she is kind of disheartened to see how broken everybody is. But to an extent, there's also just the tactical element of, until later Aang is able to provide them with the coal that they can use as earthbending armament, they had no way to defend themselves. If they had risen up when she wanted them to, they wouldn't have been able to defend themselves against the firebending guards. So having things be more complex than just being able to have a young girl, I guess she's not, I'm not sure how old she's supposed to be, a teenage girl, give a stirring speech that's going to fix all the evils in the world. I liked that they made it more complex than that. Even when Sokka and Aang show up and they come up with this plan and get the coal to the Earthbenders, even then, at first, they don't want to resist. They're just that damaged. They've decided just to survive, which means, kneeling and saying, okay, we'll do what they want just so we survive, and then maybe someday this war will be over. And that's a powerful question to handle in a show like this, of when is it right to fight back, especially when it seems like the odds are that you will lose. The whole idea of, better to die on your feet than live on your knees or whatever. It's like, is that really true? I think it's more complicated than that, right? It's like, it might be that it's better to live on your knees today so that you could fight later rather than dying on your feet today. But yeah, so it's a complex situation. We have a fun guest star of George Takei as the voice of the Warden, and who does this great portrayal of a character who's kind of vain and self-important. I mean, clearly this is a kind of a crap job for a high-level Fire Nation soldier to essentially just be like a prison warden and a little out of the way. Like, it's important tactically because this refinery makes helps to refuel the Fire Nation ships, but at the same time, it's clear that like probably everybody else thinks it's a pretty crappy job. But he does his best, and he does this whole song and dance where he likes to think of himself as elegant and refined, and oh, everybody's just honored guests. Treat me with the courtesy that I treat you, and we'll get along fine. That sort of thing. Except that just because one of these old, sickly prisoners can't help but cough during his speech, he gets thrown into solitary for a week. And so it's all kind of it's grimy, and it just makes you really uncomfortable seeing the state of the Fire Nation at this point, because what we've definitely seen is while they're still fearsome and dangerous, that there's been some well, I guess we didn't really see them before, but we get the sense that there's been some degradation over time. Like maybe the real honorable soldiers have been kind of weeded out through attrition over time, because if the Fire Lord is, who we've not really met yet within the show, if the instructions are kind of, hey, just keep them under control, and they're not, the soldier that we saw at the beginning shaking down the shop owner, like if that sort of thing is tolerated, pretty soon the whole thing becomes just sort of a haven of corruption and power seeking, and that's what it's going to be. But the idea of it taking more to to inspire the earthbending prisoners, it's again nuanced in a way that a lot of kids shows aren't. Also, just fun details. We got the humor of the attempt to portray Katara as an earthbender so she could get arrested, and the phony argument between her and Sokka, and her making a big joke about how big his ears are, and him obviously taking that a little bit seriously and being a little sensitive about it. It's kind of fun. And the fun exchange with the warden and his guards where they spotted Appa, and she's saying it's a flying buffalo, and then someone else says it was a flying bison, and then the warden is like, are you telling me you don't know the difference between a buffalo and a bison? And I guess he says, which one was it, a buffalo or a bison? And the guard is like, I'm not really sure what the difference is, but is that the point here? And then, of course, he gets thrown overboard. And just as far as showing more cool technique of earthbending, and just how visually different the styles and the move sets are for waterbending versus airbending versus earthbending is nice stuff. And then, of course, you get the fun combination effects like Aang creating his little air turbine machine gun that they dump the coal into. So good stuff. So again, an episode where we're not advancing a plot as much as fleshing out the rest of the world, but it's still effective in that sense, and giving a good, perspective of what the world is like now, so that we know if we care about it changing or not. But on that note, next episode begins a two-parter, Winter Solstice Parts 1 and 2. I'm going to be watching Part 1 next week, and that is where we're going to have our A-plot kick back into gear. So I will talk to you guys tomorrow for 5 more minutes, and next week about the next episode of Avatar.